A nurse finished her shift and began the familiar journey back home, expecting nothing more than an ordinary end to the day. She never arrived. In the immediate aftermath, investigators were left with virtually nothing to work with. No witnesses, no clear suspects, and no obvious clues, making the case seem hopeless from the very start. However, as time passed, police began to notice a number of unsettling and unusual details that slowly emerged from the shadows. Piece by piece, these strange elements started to connect, ultimately revealing a truth that was far more shocking and unexpected than anyone could have imagined. The woman at the center of this mystery was Michelle Beets, who was born on February 22, 1953 in New Zealand. Michelle was raised in a close-knit family with an older brother, 2 younger sisters, and parents who provided a warm and supportive home. From a young age, she stood out as a bright, cheerful, and sociable child who enjoyed life to the fullest. She loved outdoor activities such as horseback riding and swimming, and cherished the time she spent laughing and bonding with her friends. Her intelligence and dedication became clear early on, and at just 13 years old, she earned admission to a prestigious girls' school where she consistently excelled academically. Michelle was deeply motivated by a lifelong desire to help others, and she dreamed of becoming a doctor one day. Because of this ambition, she approached her education with seriousness and determination, laying the foundation for the compassionate career she hoped to build. After completing her schooling, Michelle went on to earn a medical degree and began her professional life working at a hospital in Auckland, where she quickly proved herself to be skilled, reliable, and deeply committed to patient care. Despite finding success in New Zealand, she eventually felt the pull to start a new chapter abroad and made the decision to move to Australia. She settled in Sydney and took a position at a large hospital, continuing her work as a nurse and steadily building a strong reputation within the medical community. Around the same period, Michelle met a man named David, and the two entered into a romantic relationship that became an important part of her personal life. Through years of hard work, long hours, and genuine passion for helping others, she rose through the ranks and ultimately became the head of nursing at the hospital, a leadership role that reflected both her experience and her unwavering dedication to her profession. Her accomplishments did not go unnoticed. At one point, Michelle was chosen to be part of the elite medical team tasked with accompanying the Pope during his visit to Australia on April 27, 2010. An honor that underscored the trust and respect she had earned in her field. By the age of 57, Michelle's life had settled into a familiar routine. On that day, she began her morning like countless others, leaving home early for her hospital shift and planning to return around 6 o'clock in the evening. On her way back, she made an ordinary stop at a local shopping center to pick up groceries, unaware that this seemingly routine day would soon take a tragic and unexpected turn. At around 6:20 p.m., a couple out for a routine walk with their dog along Michelle Street were suddenly jolted by the sound of a woman screaming. The cries were intense and clearly coming from nearby, prompting immediate concern. Acting on instinct, the couple followed the sound, which led them directly to Michelle's home. As they reached the property, they witnessed a disturbing sight. A man dressed in a hoodie, his face concealed by a balaclava and a backpack slung over his shoulders, was climbing out of the yard. When the couple attempted to confront him and block his path, the man bolted, sprinting away and vanishing before they could do anything to stop him. As the couple cautiously moved closer to the house, the horrifying reality of the situation became clear. A woman was lying on the floor of the front veranda, motionless and badly injured. When they rushed to her side and checked for a pulse, they saw a deep, severe wound stretching across her neck. Despite the injury, she was still conscious and weakly turned her head toward them, appearing to struggle to speak or communicate. However, the damage was too extensive for her to make any sound. Tragically, before emergency services could arrive, Michelle succumbed to her injuries. Shortly afterward, police were called to the scene, marking the beginning of a shocking and deeply troubling investigation. The first priority for investigators was to formally confirm the identity of the victim, and it was quickly established that the woman was indeed Michelle. A closer examination of her body revealed that the horrific injury to her neck was not the only wound she had suffered. The coroner also documented multiple stab wounds along with unmistakable signs of a violent struggle, indicating that Michelle had fought fiercely in an attempt to defend herself against her attacker. In the early stages of the investigation, detectives believed the crime may have been the result of a robbery gone wrong. Based on the positioning of the body and the scattered groceries, it appeared likely that Michelle was attacked almost immediately after stepping onto the veranda upon returning home. Investigators theorized that she may have unexpectedly encountered a burglar in the act of breaking in, triggering a sudden and deadly confrontation. At first glance, this explanation seemed plausible. The back door of the house showed clear evidence of forced entry, supporting the idea that someone had unlawfully entered the property. However, as detectives dug deeper into the details, the burglary theory began to unravel. There were no signs that the intruder had moved through the house. No fingerprints or traces left behind, and none of Michelle's belongings were missing. The final blow to this initial assumption came when investigators uncovered something far more revealing. The power lines outside the house had been cut, completely shutting off electricity to the property. This single act disabled everything, including the home's alarm system, suggesting the attacker had planned the assault in advance rather than acting on impulse. The security company monitoring the alarm was immediately alerted when the power went out and attempted to contact Michelle by calling both her home phone and her mobile. When she failed to answer either call, they followed protocol and contacted her partner, David. He told them he was only a few minutes away from the house and said he would go there himself to check on the situation. By the time David arrived, the scene had already transformed into one of chaos and emergency. Police cars lined the street and an ambulance was parked outside the house. When David was informed that Michelle had been brutally murdered, he reportedly collapsed and fainted on the spot. Given the extreme violence of the attack and the steps taken to disable the power, detectives quickly concluded that the crime was almost certainly personal rather than random. As is common in such cases, David became the first person of interest, particularly because he had stated that he was nearby at the time of the killing, placing him uncomfortably close to the scene during the critical window. However, investigators were soon able to verify David's alibi. He had been at a different location at the time of the attack, and forensic examinations found no trace of blood on him or any evidence linking him to the crime. With no grounds to hold him, police officially cleared David of suspicion and were forced to widen their search for other leads. Unfortunately, the investigation quickly ran into difficulties. The crime scene itself offered very little in the way of usable evidence. Aside from a few faint smudged footprints leading away from the house toward a nearby street, there was almost nothing to help identify the killer. Those footprints, though unclear, at least pointed investigators in the same direction witnesses had reported seeing the suspect flee. Using that information, officers began an extensive review of surveillance footage, pulling recordings from hundreds of security cameras positioned along the suspected escape route and in surrounding areas. At the same time, news of Michelle's murder spread rapidly throughout the city, sending waves of fear and disbelief through the local community. Her neighborhood was known as an upscale, quiet area where serious crime was virtually unheard of, and even minor offenses were rare, making the brutal killing all the more shocking to residents who had always felt safe in their surroundings. With the killer having left behind almost no forensic evidence, detectives began to suspect that this was not an impulsive act carried out by an inexperienced offender. Instead, they wondered whether the attacker had committed similar crimes before or possessed specialized training, possibly in law enforcement or the military. The level of planning involved pointed to someone who understood how to avoid detection. Investigators also believed the killer may have been watching Michelle for some time, carefully observing her habits and daily routine in order to choose the right moment to strike. One of the most telling signs of this preparation was the cutting of the external power lines, which not only disabled the alarm system, but also shut off the motion-activated lights on the front door. This detail appeared especially calculated. By the time Michelle returned home that evening, darkness was already setting in, and without the veranda light, the entrance was left in near total shadow. This would have allowed the attacker to conceal himself close to the door and lie in wait for her arrival, ambushing her the moment she stepped inside. While officers continued the painstaking task of reviewing surveillance footage in hopes of spotting the suspect, detectives shifted their focus to Michelle's personal and professional life. They began interviewing her friends and co-workers, and hospital staff revealed that there had been past issues involving certain patients who had caused trouble or made other nurses feel uneasy, raising the possibility that the attack may have been connected to her work. Despite exploring these possibilities, investigators were unable to find any direct connection between the past incidents at the hospital and Michelle's murder. Another potential lead emerged when detectives discovered that Michelle had previously fired an employee for stealing prescription drugs from the hospital's storage room. Given the seriousness of that dismissal, police considered the possibility of revenge. But after further investigation, this angle also led to a dead end. None of the evidence suggested that the former employee had any involvement in the crime. However, as detectives continued conducting in-depth interviews with Michelle's co-workers, one name began to surface repeatedly. Again and again, staff members mentioned a man named Walter, describing him as someone whose behavior had always been unsettling and unusual. Walter was originally from the United States and had come to Australia on a work visa. He had been hired as a nurse at the same hospital where Michelle worked. And notably, Michelle herself had been his supervisor, the person responsible for approving and signing off on his employment paperwork. Just a few months before the murder, Michelle had made the decision not to renew Walter's contract. After multiple formal complaints were filed against him, a move that may have deeply affected him and soon placed him firmly on investigators' radar. Several nurses had formally reported Walter for inappropriate behavior, and many members of the hospital staff admitted they were genuinely afraid of him. He had built a reputation for being short-tempered, volatile, and emotionally unpredictable, making co-workers uneasy whenever he was around. His behavior was so concerning that when the time came for Michelle to inform him that his contract would not be renewed, she did not feel safe doing it alone. In fact, she specifically asked a colleague to remain in the room with her during the conversation because she feared how Walter might react to the news. Disturbingly, the situation did not end with his dismissal. After Walter was fired, Michelle confided in her co-workers that she had seen him near her house on multiple occasions, a revelation that deeply frightened her and suggested that his fixation had not faded. When detectives uncovered this information, they quickly began to suspect that Walter may have been stalking Michelle in the days or weeks leading up to her murder. Their concerns intensified even further when they learned that Walter had previously served in the United States Marine Corps and possessed extensive combat training, a background that could explain both the calculated nature of the attack and his ability to carry it out so efficiently. When investigators finally brought Walter in for questioning, he firmly denied any involvement in Michelle's murder. He insisted that there had never been any animosity between them, claiming that he bore no grudge over losing his job and barely knew her at all. According to Walter, their interactions at work were minimal, and he portrayed himself as having had no meaningful connection or conflict with her. However, the accounts of other hospital staff painted a starkly different picture. Colleagues recalled that Walter and Michelle interacted almost daily, and there was clear tension in their relationship. Far from being strangers, their encounters were frequent and often fraught, contradicting Walter's assertions that he hardly knew her. Walter also claimed he had no motive to harm Michelle. He said the only reason he had wanted to keep the job was for his visa, and that even after being fired, he had managed to maintain legal residency in Australia. Regarding the night of the murder, Walter provided an alibi. He claimed he had met his wife at a train station around 7:00 p.m., after which they went home together. Walter vehemently insisted that he had never been near Michelle's house on the night of the murder. Police conducted a thorough search of his home, looking for any trace of evidence that could link him to the crime, but the investigation came up empty. Despite the lack of physical proof, detectives still considered Walter their primary suspect. His past behavior, the tension with Michelle, and his possible motives kept him at the center of their inquiry. But without concrete evidence, they could not formally charge him. Then, just days after Michelle's death, an unsettling incident occurred. Walter was admitted to the very same hospital from which he had been fired, having suffered some kind of seizure. The irony was chilling. It was Michelle's colleagues, the staff, who had worked alongside her and who already suspected Walter might be capable of harming her, who were now responsible for treating him. Meanwhile, investigators painstakingly reviewed hundreds of hours of surveillance footage in the area surrounding Michelle's house. Finally, their efforts paid off. On one recording from a shopping center less than a mile from her home, they caught a crucial glimpse. A man bearing a striking resemblance to Walter. This discovery reignited the investigation, giving detectives the first concrete lead that could potentially tie him to the night of the murder. The timestamp on the surveillance footage was damning. It showed Walter at the shopping center just 10 minutes after Michelle had been murdered. Yet, the video revealed more than just his presence. It captured him tossing a backpack into a nearby trash bin before walking away. An action that immediately raised suspicions. When investigators confronted Walter and showed him the footage, he remained surprisingly calm. He admitted it was indeed him on the video, but claimed he had simply stopped at the mall to run errands. As for the backpack, he insisted it was old and something he had been meaning to discard for a while, downplaying the significance of his actions. In response, police dispatched crews to multiple landfill sites across the city, hoping to recover the backpack as potential evidence, but their search yielded nothing. Despite the growing list of suspicious details linking him to the case, detectives still lacked the concrete proof required to formally charge Walter with Michelle's murder. Over the following weeks, investigators found themselves repeatedly hitting dead ends. It seemed as if the killer had meticulously covered every trace of his presence, leaving the authorities grasping at shadows. For a time, the case teetered on the edge of despair, raising the haunting possibility that justice for Michelle might never be achieved. 3 weeks after the murder, the investigation took a dramatic and completely unexpected turn. Walter's wife, Samantha, came forward and contacted the police, telling them she was willing to testify against her husband in exchange for full immunity. Her decision immediately changed the course of the case. According to Samantha, Walter harbored deep resentment toward Michelle for refusing to renew his contract at the hospital. He was convinced that she had also provided negative references about him to other medical facilities, which he believed was the reason he had been unable to secure another job. Samantha told investigators that Walter frequently complained about Michelle at home, speaking about her with anger and contempt. Over time, his comments grew more aggressive, shifting from insults to open talk of revenge. Initially, he claimed that he only wanted to frighten Michelle in a strange and unsettling way. He told his wife that he planned to dress up as a Mormon missionary and go to her house to silently hand her a religious pamphlet. However, his behavior soon took a far more disturbing turn. Walter began making bizarre and delusional claims, telling Samantha that he worked for a secret Irish organization that had supposedly granted him permission to kill. He even said he would be paid a large sum of money to carry out the act, revealing just how deeply his thoughts had spiraled into darkness and obsession. In the weeks leading up to Michelle's death, Walter's actions revealed a chilling level of premeditation. He meticulously studied her daily routines and familiar routes, making careful note of when and where she would be. Using peonases, he called her home more than 30 times in an effort to determine when she was at home alone. His surveillance did not stop there. He frequently drove past her house, watching her movements openly and brazenly without any attempt to hide. Michelle herself reported seeing him near her home on multiple occasions, a realization that left her deeply unnerved. Samantha, Walter's wife, told police that he had even practiced knife strikes on her and her brother, concentrating on how to execute a silent throat cut, a skill he claimed to have learned during his time in the military. His obsession was relentless. Every morning when he woke and again before going to bed, he would take out a knife, sitting and staring at it for extended periods. Just days before the attack, Walter purchased an entire outfit from a thrift store, including gloves, and paid in cash to ensure the transaction could not be traced, suggesting careful planning for his appearance and actions during the crime. On the day of the murder, he did meet with his wife, but contrary to his earlier alibi of being at a train station, Samantha revealed that the meeting had occurred elsewhere, further undermining his story and placing him in a position directly connected to the timeline of the killing. Samantha revealed that she had met Walter at the same shopping center, where surveillance had caught him disposing of his backpack. During their encounter, when she tried to kiss him, he recoiled and told her not to touch him because he was dirty. Then in a chilling confession, he admitted that he had just killed Michelle. He went on to describe the steps he had taken to plan the murder. Walter explained that he had broken a window at Michelle's house and attempted to pry open the back door to make the crime appear like a burglary gone wrong. He had also deliberately cut the wires leading to the house, disabling the porch lights so he could wait in the shadows for her arrival. Walter had intended to ambush Michelle from behind as she stepped onto the veranda, but that evening, unforeseen circumstances interfered. Michelle's car had broken down, forcing her to park in a different spot. When she finally made her way onto the porch, she unexpectedly saw him, and in that instant, she screamed, shattering the element of surprise he had so meticulously orchestrated. Samantha recounted the horrifying final moments of Michelle's life. Walter had told her that he wouldn't harm her if she stayed quiet. Michelle, terrified but trying to plate him, said, "Okay, I won't scream. I'm just afraid you'll hurt me." Despite her compliance, Walter immediately attacked her, slashing her throat and stabbing her multiple times in the upper body. The violence was swift and brutal. When a couple nearby ran toward the house, after hearing Michelle's screams, Walter fled the scene. He changed clothes behind a nearby garage, placed his bloodied outfit and knife into a backpack, and later disposed of it at the shopping mall, explaining the mysterious footage detectives had previously discovered. Samantha also revealed why she had not come forward sooner. She had been paralyzed by fear, terrified that if she spoke out, Walter would kill her as well. Her confession finally broke the case wide open. Around the same time, detectives received a call from a journalist claiming to have additional information. She explained that she had met Walter during the early days of the investigation, just after reporters had learned that police were beginning to suspect him, suggesting that there might be more insights from outside the immediate circle of investigators that could help corroborate Samantha's account. The journalist explained that she had obtained Walter's phone number and over the course of the next 2 weeks spoke with him multiple times. During these conversations, Walter repeatedly insisted that he was innocent, maintaining a facade of denial. But one day, the tone of his calls shifted dramatically. He told her he needed to confess something unpleasant and chillingly admitted that he had killed Michelle. He framed the murder as a contract killing, claiming he had done it for a large sum of money. Walter further told her that he had been diagnosed with cancer and said his motive was to ensure his wife had enough money to return to her home country, Vietnam, and start a new life and business there. A bizarre and self-serving justification for a horrific crime, the journalist immediately contacted the police. Unaware that detectives were already interviewing Samantha, Walter's wife, at that very moment. Samantha's brother also corroborated key details, confirming that Walter had practiced knife attacks on him and had even asked him to serve as a lookout during the murder. With this combined testimony, investigators finally had the evidence they needed to make an arrest. Walter was formally charged with murder. Despite the mounting proof against him, he refused to plead guilty and was sent to jail to await trial, leaving the community stunned but relieved that the man responsible for Michelle's brutal death was finally in custody. A few months after his arrest, a shocking incident occurred. Guards found Walter in his cell, bleeding heavily from a self-inflicted injury. He was immediately rushed to the hospital where doctors managed to stabilize him and save his life. Following this event, Walter was placed under close supervision to prevent any further attempts on his own safety. The trial began approximately a year and a half after Michelle's murder, and Walter continued to refuse to plead guilty. He appeared largely indifferent to the proceedings, showing minimal engagement and leaving nearly all interactions to his lawyer. His detached demeanor suggested a lack of remorse or acknowledgement of the gravity of the charges against him. Walter's attorney built a defense strategy that centered on the lack of physical evidence directly linking him to the crime. The defense also attempted to cast doubt on the credibility of the key witnesses, Walter's wife and her brother. They argued that both had clear motives to fabricate their testimony, as each had struck a deal with prosecutors in exchange for full immunity. Furthermore, the defense highlighted that part of this agreement included promises of Australian visas for both witnesses, implying that their statements might have been influenced by the personal benefits they were receiving. The defense argued that Walter's wife and her brother had strong incentives to fabricate their testimony, claiming that their deals with prosecutors, granting them full immunity, and even promising Australian visas, gave them every reason to tell the police exactly what they wanted to hear. Walter's lawyer also attempted to introduce the notion that his client might not have been fully aware of his actions, citing a serious brain injury he had suffered in a car accident 2 years prior to the murder. However, before the trial commenced, Walter underwent a thorough medical evaluation. Experts concluded that he showed no signs of any mental condition that could excuse or diminish his responsibility for the crime. For the prosecution, the case rested primarily on the testimony of Walter's wife and her brother, combined with the Surveillance footage from the shopping center. While there was no direct physical evidence linking Walter to the murder scene itself, the prosecution argued that the weight of the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. They presented a clear narrative. Walter's motive was simple but deadly. He had been enraged by Michelle's refusal to renew his contract at the hospital. And in his twisted reasoning, he decided to exact revenge. According to the prosecution, the meticulous planning, the stalking, and the deliberate steps he took to ambush Michelle all painted a picture of premeditation and intent, leaving little doubt about his guilt. In the end, the jury returned a verdict of guilty, and in March 2012, Walter was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of Michelle. Throughout the sentencing, he displayed a chilling lack of emotion, appearing almost detached from the gravity of the moment. When the judge asked him to stand for the verdict, he didn't seem to hear the instruction, forcing his lawyer to repeat it. Even during the trial itself, Walter had frequently smiled or made bizarre gestures toward Michelle's family members sitting in the courtroom. Behavior that unnerved everyone present and underscored his disturbing lack of remorse. After the trial, additional unsettling details emerged about Walter's past in the United States. He had an ex-wife and a child to whom he owed over $50,000 in unpaid child support, a significant factor in his obsession with maintaining his Australian visa. He had feared returning to the US where he would have to face these financial obligations. Further investigation revealed that just a few weeks before Michelle's murder, Walter had actually flown back to the United States, highlighting a pattern of calculated movements and showing that he had the freedom to travel yet still chose to remain in Australia, ultimately committing the heinous crime that would end his life of freedom. Further investigation revealed that before turning his attention to Michelle, Walter had allegedly planned to kill his ex-wife, though the reasons behind this intended crime remain unclear. Fortunately, he never carried out the act and returned to Australia, where his obsession shifted entirely to Michelle. Regarding his earlier claims about working for a secret Irish organization, detectives found absolutely no evidence to support any part of that story. Similarly, his assertions about having cancer were completely false. There were no medical records or documentation to substantiate the diagnosis. In 2015, Walter attempted to challenge his conviction by filing an appeal, arguing that the prosecution had improperly referenced his military background during the trial. However, the court rejected his appeal and he remained incarcerated to serve his life sentence. 5 years later, in a final grim twist, guards discovered Walter dead in his cell. An autopsy confirmed that he had taken his own life. With his death, the long and harrowing case finally reached its conclusion, bringing closure to Michelle's tragic story and the community affected by her murder. Yet, even with the case officially closed, certain aspects remain deeply unsettling. One particularly eerie detail is how vividly Walter's wife, Samantha, recounted every moment of the murder, almost as if she had been present herself. It's possible that Walter had deliberately told her every gruesome detail, perhaps knowing she could later use that knowledge to negotiate with the police and secure immunity as well as her Australian visa. Maybe he realized he would inevitably end up behind bars and wanted to ensure that his family would benefit from his actions in some way, however twisted that reasoning might be. This line of thinking could also explain why Samantha only came forward 3 weeks after Michelle's death, immediately demanding immunity and the visa. Her timing and conditions suggest a calculated move to protect herself while helping the authorities finally bring Walter to justice. Despite the horror of the events, Michelle's legacy continued to have a lasting impact. In 2012, the Government of New South Wales established an annual award in her honor, recognizing medical staff who have made outstanding contributions to children's healthcare. A tribute that ensures her dedication and compassion are remembered and celebrated even after her tragic and untimely death. If you found this case fascinating, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post crime case videos every night.